Okay, good morning. It is Tuesday, March 17th, 2026. We need to talk about what's happening in the Persian Gulf. What started 18 days ago as a targeted strike against Iran has now spiraled into a full-blown global crisis. And today, we're going to break down exactly how this conflict is reshaping our world in real time.
So, how did we get here? How does a regional war become a global crisis in just over 2 weeks? Well, that's what we're going to unpack. We'll start with the actual state of the fighting, then we'll look at how it's completely engulfed the region, and finally, we'll analyze the massive economic shockwaves that might just be triggering a whole new geopolitical reality.
All right, first things first, let's get a handle on the battlefield itself. This is not some quick surgical operation. 18 days in, this has become a brutal, high-intensity war of attrition. And it is putting an absolutely severe strain on Western military stockpiles.
To give you some idea of the scale here, get this. The U.S. has already burned through 1.5 times more Patriot interceptors in these 18 days than it sent to Ukraine during its entire war. I mean, that is an astonishing rate. Analysts are now openly talking about a missile famine because the sheer volume of attacks is just draining critical defenses way faster than anyone can replace them. And this quote right here, it just perfectly captures the new reality on the ground. For years, the conventional wisdom was that Iran's military was, second rate. Well, that idea has been completely shattered. Despite taking heavy damage, Iranian forces are still managing to hit strategic military and economic targets all across the Gulf. A fire this big was never going to stay contained. Just as many feared, the conflict has rippled outwards, and it's pulling in neighboring countries, turning the entire Middle East into a live fire zone. Just look at this map. It's a map of pure chaos. You've got Israel launching a ground invasion of Lebanon, which has already displaced over 800,000 people. The UAE has seen hits on critical infrastructure like Dubai Airport and the Fujairah oil port. In Iraq, bases with Western troops are being targeted, and we've already had a French soldier killed. It's even reached NATO member Turkey and a UK base in Cyprus. This is a regional conflagration, plain and simple. And all of this military chaos is fueling what might be the conflict's most potent weapon, economics. The absolute center of this economic storm is the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz. We're talking about the artery that carries a fifth of the entire world's oil supply. And right now, it's blocked.
So with that artery clamped shut, the U.S. has put out an urgent call. President Trump is demanding that allies put together a naval coalition to force the strait back open and get the energy flowing again. But here's where it gets really interesting. The response to that demand has been, a pretty stunning rejection. Key allies are flat out refusing. Germany says this isn't a job for NATO. The UK says it will not be dragged into a wider war. Even Japan has said sending warships is just too risky. This isn't happening behind closed doors, folks. This is a very public fracture in the Western alliance.
And here's the absolute kicker. Iran isn't just using the blockade as a military tactic, it's playing a much bigger game. They've offered to let some ships through, but on one condition. The oil has to be paid for in Chinese yuan, not US dollars. This is a direct frontal assault on the petrodollar system, the very foundation of the dollar's global dominance for decades. It's a move to upend the entire global financial order.
So what happens when you make a strategic move like that at a critical choke point? Well, analysts are calling it a butterfly effect. These localized disruptions are now cascading through the global system in ways that are totally unexpected.
The most obvious impact, the one you're probably feeling at the pump, is the crazy surge in oil prices. They've already hit their highest levels since the pandemic, and that alone is threatening to shove an already shaky global economy right into a full-blown recession.
But the impacts go so much deeper and get way more complex. For example, attacks on Qatar's natural gas facilities have suddenly created a global helium shortage. Okay, so what? Well, helium is critical for cooling MRI machines, which means this has kicked off a crisis in medical diagnostics worldwide. In India and Nepal, they're starting to ration cooking gas. The system is interconnected in ways nobody saw coming. And as you might guess, the forecasts are getting darker by the day. Some analysts are now warning that this isn't just about a recession anymore. They're saying the combined spike in energy and fertilizer prices, what they're calling the energy-urea nexus, could absolutely devastate agriculture in the northern hemisphere, and that could push the world into a global depression. So when you put all of these pieces together, the military drain, the political fractures, the economic chaos,
what are we really looking at? This brings us to the final and maybe the most profound consequence of this 18-day war. We're seeing hard evidence of a fundamental shift in the global balance of power. Analysts are pointing to all these signs that the post-World War II order is just cracking at the seams. You've got the petrodollar under direct assault, the UN seems completely powerless, NATO is visibly fracturing. We're getting credible reports of a hidden hand with Russia and China feeding targeting intelligence to Iran. And of course, the West's missile famine is forcing a real conversation about its long-held military superiority. This has stopped being just a war for the Middle East. It's become the catalyst for a total reevaluation of global power, of alliances, of economic systems. As one report put it, the death of the old order isn't being announced in some treaty room. It's being demonstrated on the burning decks of fuel tankers in the Persian Gulf. And the big question is, what comes next?
If you were standing on the shores of Oman this morning, looking out over the Strait of Hormuz, you would see something that really just hasn't existed in modern history.
Yeah, you would literally just see empty water.
Exactly. I mean, the most vital, heavily trafficked energy artery on the entire planet, right?
Yeah.
A waterway that usually sees, upwards of 200 massive cargo ships every single day.
And right now it's virtually a ghost town.
Just a vast, terrifying expanse of quiet, and yet, that silence is currently the loudest, most deafening geopolitical alarm bell ringing anywhere in the world.
It really is an eerie visual, isn't it? Because, well, that empty water doesn't mean the global economy has stopped needing energy.
Right.
It means the global economy is having its central artery pinched shut. We are basically looking at a physical manifestation of a systemic heart attack.
Welcome, everyone, to today's Deep Dive. It is the morning of Tuesday, March 17th, 2026.
Yeah, let that date sink in for a second.
Seriously. We are exactly 18 days into the staggering, world-altering conflict that erupted when the United States and Israel launched massive strikes against Iran.
18 days that have completely reshaped the board.
They really have. And the title of today's Deep Dive is 2026-03-17 Western Empire's Last War, How the NATO Alliance Sinks in the Persian Gulf.
I mean, it's a title that sounds almost like a historical retrospective, but we are literally living through the very first chapters of it in real time.
Exactly. So our mission today is to cut through the incredible fog of war. If you've been watching the news, you know it's just a total mess of conflicting claims, propaganda, panic.
It's impossible to parse if you just watch cable news.
Right. So we've bypassed all those talking heads. We're looking at a massive stack of sources from the last 48 hours. We're talking military intelligence reports, frontline dispatches from independent journalists on YouTube.
Raw maritime traffic data, which is huge.
Yeah, and deep dive interviews with geopolitical and military analysts. We're gathering all of this to understand the most likely scenarios for the upcoming weeks.
And more importantly, forecasting the profound effects this will inevitably have on your daily life.
Your economy, the global balance of power, all of it.
Yeah.
Now, just to set the ground rules for how we operate here, we are looking at raw data and objective analysis.
Yeah, no spin.
Exactly. There is no spin here.
Yeah.
We are not taking any sides here. We are not endorsing the viewpoints of the U.S., Israel, Iran, or any political faction.
Right.
Our sole purpose is to impartially report on the content provided in these sources and help you understand the ideas and realities being discussed by experts on the ground.
Which really is the only way to approach a crisis of this magnitude. I mean, when narratives collide this violently, the only truth left is in the logistics, the math, and the market reactions.
Okay, let's unpack this. 18 days in. The dust has supposedly settled from the initial strikes, but the conflict is actually accelerating.
It's definitely not winding down.
Not at all. Let's start with the foundational military reality of this morning. When this kicked off, it was billed as this surgical, overwhelming operation, Operation Epic Fury.
Right, and the entire U.S. and Israeli strategy relied on a decapitation strike.
Which means what exactly in this context?
Well, the doctrine of decapitation relies on a very specific assumption about your enemy. It assumes their command and control operates like a pyramid.
Okay.
The theory was that if you eliminate the apex, which in this case was Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, along with the top echelon of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC, then the rest of the structure just crumbles.
Like they fall into infighting and paralysis.
Exactly. Total systemic shock.
And they certainly hit the apex. I mean, President Donald Trump was on television boasting that 48 top leaders were killed in those initial waves.
Yeah, that was the claim.
The assumption in Washington was that the Iranian system would simply fold, or at least capitulate to American demands within a week. But I have to push back on the analysts who bought into this.
You go for it.
Wait, if you take out the leadership of an organization, I mean, it usually scrambles them. Fortune 500 company, a military, a government, there's always a power vacuum.
Sure, normally.
So why didn't the command structure break? Is this like cutting the head off a hydra instead of the snake?
The Hydra is actually the perfect metaphor, but let's look at the underlying mechanics of why it works that way.
Okay.
The Iranian military doctrine, especially within the axis of resistance, it isn't built on a Western top-down corporate model. It's built on a concept known as holy defense.
Holy defense.
Right. Structurally, it operates much more like a decentralized mesh network than a pyramid.
A mesh network meaning like there is no single central server that, if destroyed, takes down the whole internet.
Precisely. In a mesh network, every node can communicate with other nodes independently. If one node is destroyed, the network automatically reroutes the signal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so when Ali Khamenei and those 48 officials were killed, the system was physically designed not to pause.
There was no institutional mourning period that halted operations.
None. An interim leadership council was announced almost instantly by figures like Ali Larijani, and the Supreme Command seamlessly transitioned to Mojtaba Khamenei.
That's the late Supreme Leader's son.
Exactly.
And from everything we are reading in the sources, Mojtaba represents a faction that is even more uncompromising.
Much more hardline, yes.
But what really strikes me in these intelligence reports isn't just the political succession, it's the tactical pivot.
The shift in how they fight.
Right. The military analysts point out that Iran absorbed the largest kinetic strike in its history, decentralized its command, and then immediately shifted the parameters of the conflict.
Yeah, this is absolutely no longer a quick regional kinetic exchange.
Right. It's evolved into a high-intensity war of attrition.
Basically, Iran looked at the U.S. military apparatus and said, well, we cannot outgun you in a 48-hour window, but we are absolutely prepared to outlast you over a 48-month window.
Which brings us to the mathematics of this attrition. And frankly, the numbers are just mind-boggling.
They really are.
Let's look at what military strategists in these YouTube breakdowns are calling the interceptor sink.
Yes.
The raw data we are pulling shows that the U.S. has expended 1.5 times more Patriot interceptors in the Middle East in the last 15 days than it's applied to Ukraine in its entire conflict.
Wait, read that again?
1.5 times more in 2 weeks than in years of the Ukraine war.
What's fascinating here is the brutal asymmetric economics of air defense. We really need to look at how a system like the Patriot or Horad actually functions.
Because they're not cheap.
Not at all. I mean, they are marvels of engineering. They use phased array radars to detect incoming threats. They track trajectories at supersonic speeds and fire a kinetic kill vehicle to intercept the target in midair.
Sounds expensive.
That engineering comes at an astronomical cost. A single Patriot PAC-3 interceptor costs roughly $4 million.
$4 million for one missile.
Yes. And a THAAD interceptor is well over $15 million.
Okay, but Iran is not sending $15 million fighter jets for the U.S. to shoot down.
No.
The journalists are reporting they're using swarm tactics. We're talking about dirt cheap drones.
Exactly, like the Shahed drone.
Right, which is essentially, what, a lawnmower engine strapped to explosives and a GPS tracker. It costs maybe $5,000?
$5,000 is about right, so just do the math.
It's crazy.
If you force the United States to spend $4 million to destroy a $5,000 drone and you send a swarm of 500 drones, you are executing a masterclass in economic bleed-out.
Wow.
It's essentially like using a Rolex to hammer a nail. You are destroying your own wealth and finite resources just to swat a fly.
And you can't not swat the fly.
Right.
Because if that $5,000 drone hits a $1 billion radar installation, you're blind.
Exactly. But it's not just the financial cost. The analysts highlight a physical logistical bankruptcy.
The supply chains for the weapons themselves.
Yes. The U.S. is emptying its global reserves of these highly advanced, deeply complex interceptors, weapons that literally take years to manufacture.
And they're burning through them just to satisfy the frantic tactical needs in the Persian Gulf right now.
Which leaves every other U.S. strategic theater, like the Indo-Pacific and Eastern Europe, incredibly exposed.
Man.
But the sheer volume of this exchange is causing an even more immediate problem: the breakdown of command and control under pressure.
You're talking about the friendly fire incidents we saw in the reports.
Yes.
Because when you saturate the airspace with thousands of cheap drones, legacy ballistic missiles, state-of-the-art interceptors, and allied fighter jets, The fog of war becomes a literal electronic soup.
Exactly. I mean, an air defense radar operator is looking at a screen filled with hundreds of blips moving at varying speeds.
It must be terrifying.
The system relies on IFF, identify friend or foe transponders, to know what not to shoot at. But in a heavily jammed electronic warfare environment, transponders fail.
Radars get cluttered. And that leads to the tragic details we verified this morning. Kuwaiti air defenses, which are deeply integrated with the U.S. network, panicked under a swarm attack and accidentally shot down 3 U.S. F-15s.
3 of our own jets. The psychological toll that takes on an allied coalition is just devastating.
I can't even imagine.
It creates hesitation. And, hesitation in air defense means missiles get through.
We also saw the crash of the U.S. KC-135 refueling plane in Iraq, killing all 6 crew members.
Right.
The military dispatches suggest the airspace is so lethal, so unpredictable, that the U.S. Air Force is actually terrified of conducting aerial refueling operations over Iraq right now.
But if you can't refuel your jets in the air, you drastically limit their operational range. You basically ground your own Air Force.
And we cannot view that as an accident of war.
No, it is intentional design.
The intelligence reports we were reviewing highlight that Iran's primary targets aren't just troops. They are the sensory organs of the Western military.
Yes. We have satellite imagery confirming that the radar system for an American THAAD battery in Jordan was struck and destroyed.
And similar early warning radar arrays in the United Arab Emirates were hit too.
Right.
So, wait, let me make sure I understand the mechanics of that.
Yeah.
If you destroy the radar, the actual missile launchers are basically useless, right?
Exactly. I mean, the launcher is just a tube with a rocket in it. Without the radar to tell it where to go, it is a multi-million-dollar paperweight. By blinding the radar, you intentionally punch a hole in the regional defense umbrella. You create a safe corridor for your heavier, more destructive ballistic missiles to reach high-value targets.
Like bases in Israel or the Gulf.
Exactly.
So because the initial decapitation strike failed, the U.S. and Israel are now bogged down in this exhausting, mathematically unwinnable war of attrition.
A nightmare scenario.
But, and here is the real pivot point of today's deep dive. This conflict has breached the banks of the military theater.
It's spilling over.
It is actively flooding into the one arena that affects every single listener tuning in right now, regardless of where they live. We are witnessing the weaponization of the global economy.
And the military strikes, honestly, in the grand scheme of Iranian strategy, are almost secondary to the economic strangulation, which brings us back to that visual of the empty water.
The Strait of Hormuz. I mean, we hear the name constantly in the news, but let's break down why it's the ultimate geopolitical choke point.
It really is the ultimate bottleneck.
It's this narrow waterway between Oman and Iran, only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point.
And through that tiny 21-mile gap flows about 1/5 of global petroleum liquids consumption.
1/5.
Yeah, and more than 1/4 of the global seaborne oil trade. It is the jugular vein of the industrialized world.
Now, historically, Western military analysts assumed that if Iran ever tried to close the strait, they would do it physically.
Right, like lay naval mines.
Or sink a few massive oil tankers to block the shipping lanes. And the counter-argument was always, well, the U.S. Navy has the 5th Fleet stationed right next door in Bahrain. They have minesweepers. They can just escort the tankers through.
That was the old assumption, yeah.
But I look at the traffic data today, from 200 ships down to fewer than 8. And it's not a physical wall blocking them. So what is keeping the U.S. Navy from just forcing the strait open?
Because we're no longer in the era of World War II naval escorts, the evolution of anti-ship ballistic missiles, or ASBMs, has completely rewritten the rules of naval engagement in confined waters.
Okay, how so?
Iran doesn't need to sink ships to block the strait physically. They simply have to sit mobile missile launchers on the mountainous terrain of their coastline.
Just pointing at the water.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the U.S. Navy knows that bringing a multi-billion-dollar aircraft carrier or destroyer into a narrow strait, right into the teeth of thousands of supersonic anti-ship missiles, is basically suicidal.
Wow. So the mere threat of violence is enough to spike maritime insurance premiums so high that commercial shipping companies just flat out refuse to send their vessels into the Gulf.
Right. No insurance company is underwriting that trip.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The narrative in these analyst interviews shifts from a military blockade to something much more sophisticated. It's not a blockade at all.
No, it's a financial filter.
Yes, a toll booth on the global economy.
Iran is still allowing certain vessels to pass. If you look at the satellite tracking data on YouTube, Chinese flagged ships, Iranian tankers, and vessels destined for India are actually moving through.
But there's a massive, unprecedented condition attached to this safe passage.
Massive.
They are allowing these ships to pass, but only if the oil is paid for in Chinese yuan, the RMB.
Yeah.
They are outright refusing to allow any transactions in U.S. dollars to transit the strait.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we are watching a direct, calculated assassination of the petrodollar.
The death of the petrodollar. Let's do a quick historical deep dive on that to understand the gravity of this.
Yeah, back in the 1970s, after Nixon took the U.S. off the gold standard, the dollar was pretty vulnerable.
Super vulnerable.
So the U.S. struck this masterstroke deal with Saudi Arabia and the OPEC nations.
The deal was, we provide military protection and weapons.
Right. And in exchange, OPEC agreed to price all of their oil exports exclusively in U.S. dollars.
Which created a synthetic, insatiable global demand for the dollar.
Exactly.
Because if you are Japan or Germany or South Korea and you need oil to keep your factories running, you first have to buy U.S. dollars.
Right. And what do those countries do with all those dollars they have to hold in reserve?
Right.
They invest them in U.S. Treasury bonds.
Oh, wow.
This mechanism, called petrodollar recycling, is literally the hidden engine of American hegemony.
Because it allows the U.S. to run massive, multi-trillion-dollar deficits without hyperinflation.
Yes, because the rest of the world is forced to absorb our debt just to buy their own energy.
That is wild.
And it gives Washington the power to sanction anyone. If you are cut off from the dollar system, you can't buy oil. You starve.
But right now, today, Tehran is forcibly decoupling energy security from the U.S. dollar at the literal choke point of global supply.
Yeah, they are changing the global operating system.
If the world economy runs on Windows, which is the U.S. dollar, and Iran forces the main server to switch to Linux, the Chinese yuan, all of Washington's old software suddenly stops working.
Their sanctions, their leverage, it all evaporates in real time.
It is a brilliant, ruthless move.
It really is. I mean, if European nations or Japan want Gulf oil and Iran controls the physical flow and Iran demands yuan, well, what choice do they really have?
They will have to acquire yuan.
Exactly. This forces the global South and Asian Pacific economies into a submissive financial posture toward Beijing, shifting the center of financial gravity entirely away from Washington.
And it completely undermines the United States' ability to finance its own debt.
Oh, absolutely.
If foreign central banks stop buying U.S. treasuries because they don't need dollars for oil anymore, U.S. interest rates will skyrocket. Mortgage rates for the average listener could hit 12, 15, 20%.
The domestic economic fallout would be catastrophic.
And that economic warfare extends way beyond currency. The sources detail how they are targeting the physical infrastructure of the U.S. empire in the Middle East.
Let's look at the Gulf Cooperation Council states, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar.
These nations have hosted massive American military bases for decades, right? The Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the Navy's 5th Fleet in Bahrain.
Right.
The deal was always host our bases and we provide a security umbrella.
But the geopolitical analysts in these interviews point out that the paradigm has completely inverted.
Hosting those bases is no longer a shield.
No, it is a giant bullseye. Iran has explicitly stated that any nation allowing its airspace or territory to be used by U.S. forces to strike Iran will be considered a legitimate military target.
And we are seeing that threat materialize right now.
Yeah.
The reporting details drone strikes forcing emergency evacuations at Dubai's international airport.
Yeah.
We're seeing strikes on the Fujairah oil port in the UAE. Fuel storage tanks hit in Bahrain. Drones targeting the main airport in Kuwait.
To understand why this is so effective, you really have to look at the economic model of a country like the UAE.
Okay, tell me.
They do not rely solely on oil anymore. They have built an entire economy around being a safe, stable, luxurious hub for global business, tourism, and transit.
Dubai is pitched as the Switzerland of the Middle East.
Exactly. But that entire model is predicated on the illusion of absolute safety.
Right.
If a single $5,000 drone hits the runway at Dubai International or strikes a luxury high-rise in the financial district, the safe haven premium evaporates overnight.
Capital flight happens instantly.
Multinational corporations will just relocate their headquarters to Singapore or Geneva.
Wow. So Iran cannot defeat the U.S. military head-on. But they can make the cost of hosting the U.S. military so unsustainably high for these Gulf monarchies that the host nations will eventually turn around, look at Washington, and say, you have to leave.
That's the strategy. They're holding the economies of the Gulf hostage to force a complete U.S. military withdrawal from the region.
Okay, so we're seeing oil prices preparing to go parabolic. We're seeing the petrodollar under siege. The Gulf economies are paralyzed.
Right.
But I really want to bring this even closer to home.
Yeah.
Because a listener might hear all this and think, all right, gas will be $6 or $7 a gallon. It's going to hurt, but I'll commute less.
It's way bigger than gas.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The intelligence sources we were reviewing connect this conflict directly to your daily life in a way that goes far deeper than energy.
It goes straight to your dinner plate.
Let's talk about the urea factor.
This is, without a doubt, the most terrifying revelation in the March 16th intelligence summaries. It perfectly illustrates how a localized maritime disruption cascades into systemic global failure.
For those who aren't agronomists, let's just break down what urea actually is.
Okay.
It is a highly concentrated, solid nitrogen fertilizer. It is the end product of the Haber-Bosch process, which is arguably the most important scientific invention of the 20th century.
Oh, easily.
It takes nitrogen out of the air, mixes it with hydrogen derived from natural gas, and creates the synthetic fertilizer that literally allows the planet to grow enough food to feed 8 billion people.
Modern agricultural yields would absolutely collapse without it. We're talking about a 50% drop in crop yields globally if synthetic nitrogen is removed from the equation.
Half the world's food.
Yeah. Now, here is the geographic vulnerability. The Fertilizer Institute reported that nearly 50% of global urea and sulfur exports transit directly through the Strait of Hormuz.
Wait, half of the world's fertilizer supply relies on a waterway that is currently closed to Western shipping.
Yes. And it gets worse. The feedstock required to run the chemical plants that make urea is natural gas. 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas, LNG, also goes through that strait, primarily from Qatar.
So not only is the finished product trapped, but the raw material needed to make it anywhere else in the world is also trapped.
Exactly.
I have to ask about the timing here, because the agricultural analysts in these reports sound panicked.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the timing is a worst-case scenario. We are currently in mid-March 2026.
Right.
This is the absolute critical window for the Northern Hemisphere planting season. You cannot simply delay planting corn or wheat by a few months. Agronomy is dictated by the sun and the seasons.
Right. I mean, if you miss the soil temperature window in April and May, the crop doesn't mature before the autumn frost. It just dies.
And 35% of the global urea supply is currently paralyzed in the ports of the Middle East.
Wow.
And remember, 75% of the world's arable land is located above the equator.
So farmers across the American Midwest, the plains of Europe, and the breadbaskets of Asia are prepping their tractors right now, and they literally cannot get the nitrogen they need to put into the ground.
Which mathematically guarantees severe harvest failures by the third quarter of this year. We are watching this crisis pivot in real time.
From energy to food.
It is moving from energy inflation, which is painful, but societies can survive it, to an existential threat to global food security.
The UN World Food Program is already issuing catastrophic warnings.
This is the exact mechanical pathway by which a radar installation getting blown up in Jordan in March causes empty shelves and skyrocketing bread prices in your local supermarket in October.
It's the ultimate butterfly effect.
Yeah.
It's like pulling a single thread on a sweater, but you don't realize the thread is connected to your hospital, your computer, and your grocery store.
That's a great way to put it.
And speaking of these fragile interconnected systems, the cascading supply chain failures mentioned in the latest dispatches are just mind-blowing.
Oh, they're wild.
Let's pivot from agriculture to healthcare and tech. Let's pull another thread from the sources. Helium.
Yeah, most people associate helium with party balloons or blimps, but it is a critical, non-renewable element. And Qatar happens to be one of the world's largest producers of helium.
How do they get it?
They capture it as a byproduct of their natural gas extraction.
But because Qatar's gas exports are heavily disrupted by the maritime insurance spikes and the physical threat of strikes in the Gulf, there is a sudden, massive global shortage of liquid helium.
Right.
Why is liquid helium so important to a hospital?
Liquid helium is the only element cold enough to act as the essential cooling agent for the superconducting magnets inside MRI machines.
I had no idea.
Yeah, an MRI magnet has to be cooled to nearly absolute zero to function. If the hospital can't get liquid helium to top off the machine, the magnet undergoes what's called a quench.
A quench.
Yeah, it heats up, loses superconductivity, and effectively boils off its remaining helium violently.
And once it quenches, the machine is dead.
Complete.
The intelligence reports explicitly state that this helium bottleneck is crashing the availability of MRI machines globally right now.
It's terrifying.
They highlight healthcare diagnostic companies being thrown into absolute chaos because they cannot service their imaging equipment.
So an elderly patient in London or a young mother in New York might have their critical cancer screening delayed by 6 months purely because the Strait of Hormuz is closed.
That is the invisible human toll of supply chain warfare.
Exactly. And then we look at the tech sector, specifically Taiwan.
Yes, the geopolitical analysts have zeroed in on Taiwan's energy vulnerability as a massive pressure point in this conflict.
Over the past decade, Taiwan has largely phased out its nuclear power generation. This was a domestic political choice, but it made them incredibly dependent on imported liquefied natural gas to power their national electrical grid.
And the maritime data indicates that due to the Hormuz blockade and the rerouting of LNG tankers, Taiwan is currently down to a mere 6-day supply of natural gas.
A 6-day window before the lights go out?
That's insane. Now, Taiwan is home to TSMC and manufactures the vast majority of the world's advanced semiconductors.
The chips that power everything.
Your iPhone, your car's computer, your hospital's ventilators, the military's jet fighters. I really want to drill down into the mechanics of why a power loss is so catastrophic for a semiconductor fab.
Okay.
It's not like a normal factory where the lights go out, the workers go home, and you turn the machines back on tomorrow.
Not at all. Semiconductor fabrication plants operate in some of the most sterile, finely tuned environments on Earth.
Clean rooms.
Clean rooms that are thousands of times cleaner than a surgical operating room. They use extreme ultraviolet lithography machines that require massive, uninterrupted amounts of power.
And the process takes forever.
The silicon wafers take up to 90 days of continuous baking, chemical etching, and vacuum sealing to complete.
So if the power grid fluctuates even for a few seconds, the delicate temperature controls fail.
Yes.
The air filtration stops.
And if the climate control fails, microscopic particulate matter instantly contaminates the environment. Every single silicon wafer currently in the 90-day production cycle is ruined.
Billions of dollars.
Billions of dollars of immediate physical loss. And it takes months to recalibrate and restart a clean room once it has been compromised.
Unbelievable.
If Taiwan's power grid rolls into blackouts, the global semiconductor industry effectively halts.
And here's the truly Machiavellian geopolitical twist that the analysts are pointing out today. China, anticipating this exact kind of Western vulnerability, has spent the last decade securing its own energy supply lines.
Yep.
They have overland pipelines from Russia, and they are buying Iranian oil via Chinese-flagged ships paying in yuan. Beijing has energy. Taiwan does not.
This creates an unprecedented leverage scenario. China could step in to mediate Taiwan's survival by offering to route emergency energy supplies across the strait.
Oh, why?
Beijing might achieve de facto economic control or immense political leverage over Taiwan without ever firing a single bullet or launching a single amphibious assault ship.
They conquer Taiwan with natural gas, simply because the United States initiated a war in the Persian Gulf that choked off Taiwan's traditional energy lifelines.
That is three-dimensional chess on a global scale.
It really is. Which brings us to the political fallout among traditional Western allies. Because Europe and Asia are staring down the barrel of this economic gun, and they are reacting in a way Washington clearly did not anticipate.
Let's transition to the diplomatic front. We are looking at a profound fracturing of the NATO alliance.
Yeah. U.S. President Trump has essentially invoked the traditional playbook. He has demanded that NATO and Asian allies, the UK, France, Germany, Japan, send their warships to the region to form a naval coalition.
To police the Strait of Hormuz and fix the blockade.
Historically, that is exactly how American hegemony operates.
Right. The U.S. takes aggressive military action, and the allies fall in line to either support the objective or clean up the geopolitical mess because they rely on the U.S. security umbrella.
But this time, we are seeing the emergence of a coalition of the unwilling.
The pushback is genuinely unprecedented. The dispatches are filled with quotes from allied leaders flatly refusing Washington's demands.
Yeah, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer stated publicly that British forces will not be drawn into a wider regional war.
French President Emmanuel Macron is refusing to commit naval assets.
German Chancellor Scholz stated clearly that NATO, as an organization, has no role in policing the Strait of Hormuz. Japan and South Korea are quietly but firmly backing away.
It's a total rejection.
But wait, I have to play devil's advocate here. Isn't NATO bound by Article 5?
Right.
If the U.S. is taking fire in the Gulf, Aren't the allies legally obligated to fight alongside them?
That is a common misunderstanding of how the NATO Charter works. Article 5 is strictly geographically bound to Europe and North America.
Oh, I see.
An attack on a U.S. base in Iraq or a U.S. ship in the Persian Gulf does not trigger mutual defense. Furthermore, Article 5 is fundamentally defensive.
And Europe views this as offensive.
Yes, European capitals view Operation Epic Fury, the decapitation strike against Iran, as an offensive, preemptive U.S. action.
So they're essentially looking at Washington and saying, you started this war without consulting us. You launched an assassination campaign that failed to collapse the regime.
Right.
You triggered an economic catastrophe that is going to starve our farmers and freeze our industries. And we are absolutely not sacrificing our own naval fleets and our domestic economies to clean up your mess.
It's a stunning rebuke. And military analysts are pointing out the deep historical irony here. NATO was expanded and maintained largely to project U.S. power and secure Western dominance globally.
Right.
But now, the alliance is fracturing precisely because European nations blame the U.S. for the devastation they are currently suffering. They see Washington's unilateral military action as reckless.
And they are actively decoupling their security and economic interests from American foreign policy.
And this massive crack in the foundation of the Western alliance isn't happening in a vacuum. It is being actively wedged open by what the intelligence reports refer to as systemic spoilers.
We need to talk about the hidden hand in all of this: Russia and China.
There is high-confidence intelligence circulating in these leak summaries that Russia and China are providing real-time satellite targeting data to Iranian forces.
Now, let's explain the difference between organic radar and satellite data, because it's crucial to understanding why Iran's strikes have been so devastatingly accurate.
Okay.
If I am an Iranian missile commander and I turn on my ground-based radar to look for an American base to shoot at, what happens?
The moment you emit a radar frequency, you paint a giant electronic bullseye on your own position.
Right.
U.S. electronic warfare planes, like the EA-18G Growler, will instantly detect that emission, triangulate your position, and drop an anti-radiation missile on your head before you even launch. Organic radar is highly vulnerable.
But if you receive your targeting coordinates passively via a secure data link from a Russian satellite orbiting in space,
Then you are invisible. You receive the exact GPS coordinates of an American NHA radar installation or a UAE fuel depot or a Kuwaiti runway. You program those coordinates into your ballistic missile, launch it, and immediately move your mobile launcher to a new location. You never emitted a traceable radar signal.
and that explains why Iran's strikes are becoming notably sharper and more precise. They aren't firing blindly into the desert.
No, not at all.
They are threading the needle of U.S. air defenses because they are being fed top-tier real-time intelligence from the combined space assets of the Russian and Chinese militaries.
This raises an important question that analysts across the globe are debating this morning. Are we witnessing the intentional, coordinated dismantling of the U.S.-led rules-based order by a coordinated BRICS alliance?
It certainly looks like a synchronized strategy. Russia and China don't need to put a single soldier on the ground in Iran. They don't need to fire a shot.
Exactly.
By simply supplying intelligence and providing a financial alternative via the yuan, they're enabling Iran to bleed the United States dry. And the geopolitical benefits for them are immediate.
Let's look at the missile famine we discussed earlier. Every Patriot interceptor the U.S. expends over the Persian Gulf is an interceptor that is not being shipped to Ukraine.
Right.
Russia benefits directly and immediately on the European battlefield from the U.S. military being bogged down in the Middle East.
And China.
Meanwhile, China benefits economically and strategically in the Pacific, watching the U.S. drain its naval readiness and alienate its European allies. It is a multi-front, asymmetrical challenge to Western dominance.
It's a terrifyingly interconnected web. Okay, so we've established the reality on the ground as of day 18. We've looked at the tactical failures of the decapitation strike, the economic shockwaves of the petrodollar assault, the supply chain collapse of fertilizer and semiconductors, and the diplomatic fracturing of NATO.
That's a lot of ground covered.
Based on this massive stack of intelligence and reporting, we have to look forward. What happens next? Let's forecast the next 2 to 4 weeks.
The most immediate pressure point we are tracking is Washington's desperate desire for an off-ramp.
They want out.
The diplomatic leaks suggest the U.S. wants a ceasefire, or at least a tactical pause, so they can declare some form of victory and de-escalate without losing face.
But Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, has firmly and publicly rejected any talks.
Yeah, they believe they have the strategic upper hand.
They have absorbed the best punch the U.S. and Israel could throw, and they are now focused on establishing long-term, painful deterrence. They want to ensure Washington never contemplates a regime change strike again.
Right.
So, if diplomacy is dead, what are the most likely scenarios for escalation?
Scenario 1 is the expansion of the maritime blockade beyond the Persian Gulf. Analysts are watching the Red Sea very closely.
Okay.
They expect the Houthi forces in Yemen, Ansarullah, to officially and permanently close the Bab el-Mandeb Strait any day now.
That's the other major geopolitical choke point, right?
Yeah.
The southern entrance to the Red Sea leading up to the Suez Canal.
Exactly. The Houthis have spent the last several years stockpiling advanced anti-ship missiles and air defenses. The latest intelligence indicates they now possess hypersonic missiles capable of reaching deep into Israel or targeting heavily armored U.S. naval vessels.
Wow, hypersonic.
If they close Bab el-Mandeb, they don't just block European trade to Asia. They completely cut off Saudi Arabia's remaining oil export routes from the Red Sea side.
Saudi Arabia would be landlocked from an energy export perspective. Which brings us directly to scenario 2, the economic breaking point for the Gulf states.
It's going to be brutal.
We talked about the physical targeting of their airports and oil depots, but the macroeconomic forecasts coming out of the financial sector are just staggering.
We are looking at reports from institutions like Goldman Sachs. They estimate that if this attrition warfare continues for just a few more months, Qatar could suffer a 14% contraction in its GDP.
14%?
Saudi Arabia could face a 3 to 5% contraction.
A 14% drop in GDP isn't a recession, it's a depression.
A total collapse.
It is catastrophic wealth destruction. And we have to remember the political reality of these Gulf monarchies. They do not hold power through democratic mandate.
No.
They hold power through an unwritten social contract with their citizens. We maintain absolute political control, and in exchange, we provide you with extraordinary, tax-free economic prosperity.
Precisely. If their economies crash, if the luxury real estate market in Dubai collapses, if the oil revenue stops flowing, that social contract is broken.
The royal families will be in trouble.
Your royal families in Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, and Doha will be in immediate danger of domestic uprisings.
So the forecast is that these Gulf states, acting out of sheer self-preservation, will soon put immense, overwhelming pressure on the United States to end the war at any cost.
And if Washington refuses, these host nations may formally demand the complete withdrawal of U.S. forces to appease Iran and save their own regimes, which would effectively end American military projection in the Middle East.
Completely. Then we have to confront scenario 3. Beneath the geopolitics, the macroeconomics, and the military strategy is the sheer human cost.
The humanitarian and cultural catastrophe.
It is so easy to get caught up in the satellite imagery and the commodity prices that we forget the visceral reality on the ground.
The human toll over these 18 days is staggering.
The frontline dispatches confirm that over 1,400 Iranians have been killed by the U.S. and Israeli strikes, the vast majority being civilians caught in the blast radius of infrastructure targets.
And we are seeing hospitals severely damaged in Tehran.
And the displacement is monumental.
The reports note over 800,000 people displaced in Lebanon as Israel conducts ground operations in the south, trying to secure its northern border.
Millions more are displaced internally within Iran as people flee the urban centers targeted by bombers.
We are also seeing the destruction of human history. UNESCO heritage sites like the 1,800-year-old Falak al-Aflaq castle in Iran and ancient structures in Isfahan have suffered severe structural damage from the shockwaves of bunker-busting munitions.
But the violence isn't just from high explosives. The analysts are pointing heavily toward the silent, systemic killer, economic sanctions.
Yes.
There was a recent study published by a prominent public health professor, Dr. Reza Majzadeh, in The Lancet, which is one of the most prestigious, peer-reviewed medical journals in the world.
It is a devastating piece of research. Analyzing 50 years of global public health data, the study concluded that comprehensive U.S. and EU economic sanctions kill approximately 500,000 people globally every single year.
Let me repeat that. 500,000 people annually. And this isn't collateral damage from a drone strike. How exactly do banking sanctions kill a civilian?
It's the mechanism of compliance. The U.S. Treasury uses a system called OFAC to enforce sanctions. Now, technically, humanitarian goods like medicine and food are exempt from sanctions.
But the reality of the global banking system is very different.
International banks use the SWIFT network to transfer money. If a French bank processes a transaction for an Iranian hospital trying to buy insulin, They run the risk of the U.S. Treasury deciding that transactions somehow benefited the Iranian government.
And if the U.S. Treasury decides that, they can fine the French bank $10 billion or cut them off from the U.S. dollar system entirely.
Exactly. So banks engage in what is called overcompliance. They simply refuse to process any transaction remotely connected to a sanctioned country, regardless of the humanitarian exemptions.
The risk is just too high.
Because of this banking blockade, sanctioned nations physically cannot import essential medicines, raw materials for pharmaceuticals, or replacement parts for medical equipment like dialysis machines.
The professor in the study actually shared a deeply personal, heartbreaking anecdote. He mentioned his own mother dying of a preventable hospital-acquired infection in a Tehran ICU.
Oh, man.
She died simply because the hospital could not procure the specific common antibiotic she needed, purely due to the international banking sanctions blocking the purchase order.
That is the grim reality of economic warfare. It systematically degrades the foundational building blocks of a nation's health system.
Yep.
And with the current intense escalation of the blockade and the collapse of the local infrastructure, that humanitarian crisis inside Iran and Lebanon is only going to multiply exponentially.
So what does this all mean for you, listening right now?
Yeah, that's a big question.
Tuning in from your car on the way to work or making breakfast thousands of miles away from the Persian Gulf. What should you be preparing for in the coming weeks and months?
It means you need to prepare your household for a fundamental paradigm shift. The era of cheap, reliable, frictionless global supply chains that we've enjoyed for the last 30 years is suspended, perhaps indefinitely.
You should expect severe, sustained inflation, and not just paying more at the gas pump.
No, by the fall of this year, you will likely see a massive spike in the cost of basic food staples because of the fertilizer collapse.
You should anticipate bizarre, highly specific supply chain shortages, things you would never connect to the Middle East.
Like we discussed with the MRI machines and helium.
Or potentially critical delays in consumer electronics, car manufacturing, and medical devices, if Taiwan's energy crisis deepens and the semiconductor fabs go dark.
And on a macro historical level, you need to understand that you are watching the painful, violent birth of a fundamentally changed geopolitical map.
For your entire life, the United States has operated as an undisputed unipolar hegemon.
Right. It could project military power anywhere, sanction anyone, and dictate the terms of global finance.
This conflict is exposing the absolute limits of that reach. We are transitioning into a multipolar reality where regional powers can successfully resist and bleed the empire.
And transitions of this magnitude are inherently dangerously volatile.
Okay, let's pull all of this together. We've covered an incredible scope of material today. We started with a granular look at the military reality of Day 18.
We examined how an operation designed as a surgical decapitation strike completely misread the decentralized mesh network doctrine of its target,
Instantly escalating into a grueling, mathematically punishing war of attrition.
We traced how a military standoff over a 21-mile stretch of water in the Persian Gulf triggered the potential collapse of the petrodollar system, weaponizing the Chinese yuan to circumvent Western sanctions.
We followed the supply chain butterfly effect, seeing how stranded natural gas and sulfur ignite a looming global food crisis through the paralysis of fertilizer supplies,
while simultaneously crashing healthcare diagnostics and threatening the global semiconductor industry.
And we watched the very foundation of the NATO alliance crack, as European capitals flatly refused to sacrifice their economies to clean up Washington's geopolitical miscalculations.
It is the ultimate, undeniable demonstration that in a hyper-connected, hyper-financialized world, there is no such thing as an isolated military action.
Everything is connected.
Every kinetic strike, every destroyed radar has an equal, opposite, and amplified economic and geopolitical reaction on the other side of the planet.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. For decades, Western military interventions in the Middle East were consistently launched under the banner of securing global stability and protecting the free flow of commerce.
Right. That was always the justification.
But looking at the empty waters of the Strait of Hormuz this morning, you have to wonder, by launching this massive, unprecedented strike to eliminate a perceived regional threat, did the U.S. and Israel inadvertently hand their greatest geopolitical rivals, Russia and China, the exact tools, the perfect global conditions, and the ultimate justification they needed to permanently dismantle Western economic dominance?
It is the ultimate paradox of power. In a desperate attempt to secure the empire, they may have fired the opening shots of its unraveling.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep your eyes open, keep analyzing the raw data, and always, always keep questioning the headlines. We'll see you next time.